So, shall I use this one over here? Or?
So that's a microphone.
Oh.
This has, the sound is a little bit.
Okay, so shall I put it on the head? Or
No,
it's function like that?
It's got
Okay.
a catch over there. So
Okay. Okay, shall we start?
Sure.
So sorry for being a little bit late. I'm still in another non-German time schedule. So, I mean, can you check with them whether it is, when it's like that, okay? Or is it better like that?
It is okay, I guess.
Yes, okay. So, as already promised, I now would like to talk about professional knowledge or professional competencies of mathematics teachers, the structure and the development. And actually, as usual, that is not because it's coming out of the follow-up project of TEDS-M. It's not only a contribution by me, but of course it is together with Sigrid Blömige and others, especially Johannes König, with whom I'm working. So these kind of big projects are never done alone. So, as already said, there is this strong critique about the inefficiency of teacher education, and I don't need to repeat that, but I mean, that is the starting point of this project too. And as already mentioned, there is in the last decade, actually last 10 years, a lot of studies have been done. And if you are interested to see it, get an overview or very nice survey paper, Sigrid Blömige with June Delaney. June Delaney is a former PhD student of Deborah Ball. And we had in 2012 a joint issue of SETI-M on the LMT project together with the TEDS-M project. And the survey paper is done over there. It's done by Sigrid and June. And they have given a very nice overview on on mathematics teachers and what is known about. And the question is, first of all, as usual, how effective is teacher education? That means, how far do universities succeed in the development of the professional knowledge of future mathematics teachers? And of course, the question is further on, how does that professional knowledge of the professional competencies of the teachers develop when they are starting their career? If we look at teacher education and the discussion on in-service education, we can identify current trends. And I have gone back to work by Greiner and Linares in 2010, who developed 3 different trends on teacher education, and teacher education includes pre- and in-service education. And as said, first, there is a first trend in increasing attention to the social dimension of teacher education, means the concept of collaborative learning, teacher inquiry groups, communication of practice. Especially these communities of practice have become very popular in the last few years, and there will be even a survey carried out at IGMI 13, which is focusing especially on communities of practice and the collaborative work of teachers. Then the second trend is the focus on teachers' reflective practice, and especially a concept on which I will focus very strongly afterwards, namely teachers noticing. It is a very famous concept nowadays. I guess it's because you are laughing, you are using that?
No, I
You use it. Okay, then we will have a discussion afterwards how you have phrased that. So, and of course then teachers noticing, and of course the change of practice is very important. And especially noticing was 5 years ago when we started to work with it, it was only the work by John Mason around. And nowadays, I mean, you go to a conference and half of the papers in teacher education are noticing. maybe not half, but at least a third. So it's really a very big trend coming up. And the third one is, and that was what I already mentioned at the end when we talked about how can we change teacher education. It is the increasing attention to the general conditions of teacher education, the structure and the institutional setting. So it means under which conditions do teachers work. And if you want to change the professional knowledge or professional competencies of teachers, you must change this. I mean, that is quite obvious that you have to take into account the institutional settings. So these three trends were distinguished by Greiner and Linares and really describe the development of teacher education. And Greiner and Linares argue that these trends have to be taken seriously, and we have to regarding them as challenges for the future. So what you really see that they say, look, these are creating something which we need to take into account for the future development. And I have chosen these two researchers because they are mainly working in the area of qualitative studies, but they say, look, more external and quantitative research are needed, in particular looking at the outcomes of different types of teacher education or at longitudinal studies of mathematics teachers' learning and career. I mean, having these two very famous researchers coming from the qualitatively paradigm and claiming that we need quantitative studies is something which shows that we actually really need both kinds of studies. And in addition, it's very important to take the cultural perspective into account. I mean, I don't need to explain that after the first talk. I mean, it's obvious that you can't have a comparative study without bearing in mind a cultural perspective. And that is a question which Frederick Leung and Quimby Park already asked 2002, whether the competence of East Asian students can be attributed at least partly to the competence of their teachers. So they create some kind of a vicious cycle that you have good teachers, good students entering teacher education. They leave a university being a good teacher. They create good students and so on and so on. And the question is, it is wonderful for them. How can other countries create such a very successful cycle? So we have these two different questions these questions from different perspectives. First of all, how effective are different education systems, and to what extent do country-specific differences exist? I mean, we know that they exist, but how to explain them? And that is, as already said, the core of TEDS-M, and we can skip that. Maybe I should have done that last evening. And because the continuation of TEDS-M is the empirical basis and the core of my presentation over here. So I will definitely skip, I should have done that last night. I didn't realize that I have so many of TEDS-M in it. I will skip this part. I will start with the survey on the professional knowledge, professional competencies of mathematics teachers. What do we know? Then I will only describe the parts on TEDS-M which I know for the argumentation. And then I will mainly focus on the design and structure of the follow-up study, TEDS follow-up. And then I will describe the results of the TEDS follow-up study, and then I will conclude with further perspective. That means a project which we have started 1 year ago and which leads even more stronger to education. So with these three studies, TEDS-M, TEDS follow-up, and TEDS instruct, we try to come closer and closer to actual teaching. That is the argumentation I try to put forward, and that is really in line what other studies like the Michigan University of Michigan studies are doing, and what the coactive studies in Germany have done as well. So The survey, what do we know about the professional knowledge of mathematics teachers? Yes, as already mentioned, there is since the late 90s a growing number of empirical studies. And in the late 90s, you had mainly case studies, and they were mainly carried out in their own institution. That means somebody was carrying out a case study with their own team, with their own students, and was evaluating the efficiency of this kind of activity. And as milestones in mathematics teacher education and the professional development of teachers, there are the following 3 studies. First of all, the survey on teacher education, which was presented at ICME 10 in Copenhagen, and which was published by Jill Adler and others, and the ICME study on teacher education, which was published by Urama Evan and Deborah Bohr in 2008 as a Springer book. Then we have the International Handbook of Mathematics Teacher Education, which was edited by Terry Wood. I guess all these books are over here, and you can have a look at them. And these 2 milestones, this ICME study, which is really something like a must when you talk about teacher education and the professional development of teachers, and the Adler survey, and especially these 4 books in the International Handbook of Mathematics Teacher Education, they really fill many gaps concerning the efficiency of mathematics teacher education. Yes, as already said, there's a huge increase on research on the professional knowledge of future teachers, and coming up large-scale studies like TEDS-M and the follow-up study, and other follow-up studies are planned by IAA too. So, and if we look more analytically, how can we distinguish these different kinds of studies? Then you can see that these more recent studies are characterized by an analytic approach. It means you have different knowledge facets which are functional for thinking. If you think about TEDS-M, and of course you still have it in mind because I just presented it 2 hours ago, this competence model where you have on the one hand side the cognitive facets, and on the other hand you had the belief and affective aspects. Then you can see that this is can be characterized as an analytic approach. You have different knowledge facets and you want to distinguish them. And very important is the content knowledge. It is really in the heart of all these more recent studies, and they have as common departure point the notion of competency. And this competency approach, as already mentioned, started from the PISA study. So you see that this analytic approach is really has 3 kind of characteristic, yes, which is very important to understand this kind of approach and then further developments. And then the work of Alan Schoenfeld and Jeremy Kilpatrick, and then continued by Alan Schoenfeld, is very important because they describe the multidimensional description of the resources, and they call it proficiency in teaching. It's another kind of an approach, but it doesn't mean more than competence-oriented, highly effective teaching. They call it proficiency in teaching in their framework. It's actually a chapter in the handbook edited by Terry Wood. And what is important is that they emphasize that teaching is a knowledge-intensive domain with knowledge and effective motivational facets. This knowledge intensity is something which I think we all know. You can't teach a subject if you don't know the subject. On the other hand, as I already described a couple of minutes ago, if we look at the child-centered approaches, the high importance of knowledge is sometimes has been lost. So it is nothing which is for granted that you say, look, knowledge is important. So, and as already said, several large-scale studies on mathematics teacher knowledge share this common theoretical point. It is first of all the TEDS-M study, then it is the study Mathematical Knowledge for Teaching by the Learning Mathematics for Teaching group at the University of Michigan. It is the group around Deborah Ball and Harvey Bass. And then the Cognitive Activation in the Classroom project, the co-active study. So these three big studies really share this common theoretical orientation. Before I came over, I wrote some kind of summary on the big approaches around, and I should mention the mathematical quartet by Tim Rowland and others. And it is not mentioned over here because it has a very different starting point, developing a description of what's going on in classroom out of video studies. But I mean, if I think about three very important theoretical frameworks, about theoretical frameworks important in math education, in math teacher education, I would add the mathematical quartet as well. So, I mean, if you are interested, I can send you some information about that as well. That is not included over here because it has a very different theoretical orientation. So, TEDS-M and co-active refer to the different facets of the professional knowledge of teachers by Schulman, and the MKT framework differentiates mainly the math pedagogical content knowledge and the subject matter knowledge, and they differentiate that much further, so they actually develop for MPCK 3 additional facets, and for the subject matter knowledge 3 different facets. But the problem is you can develop that theoretically. The problem is how to really then identify that empirically and really come to reliable scales. But that is another discussion. So the common core of most studies refer to the Schulman's description of pedagogical content knowledge. Schulman has developed that in 1986, 1987, and I mean, there is hardly possible to develop any or give any talk about professional knowledge of teachers, of future teachers, without going back to Schulman. And I think that is one of the quotes, or which is mostly quoted all over the world. He described pedagogical content knowledge as a special amalgam of content and pedagogy that is uniquely the province of teachers, their own special form of professional understanding. I mean, if you look at what he has written over there, I mean, first of all, special amalgam. Amalgam is a chemical word and describes a kind of a connection, but you cannot separate it. So the question is, can you separate content and pedagogy? It's an unknown or an unknown question, or not an unknown problem. How should I say? It's a not solved problem so far. We are aiming to work on this problem, whether you can empirically separate it on a surface level. You can, but what does it mean really in deep? And then the province of the teachers, that means that it's really characterizing the teachers and distinguish teacher from other kind of professions. For example, you could say, how is a math teacher different from a mathematician? Then you would say, of course, he should have higher knowledge in MPCK, mathematics pedagogical content knowledge. And if that is not the case, you have either described the MPCK wrongly, or that is not a good teacher, or there's something wrong with your whole concept, theoretical framework. And the professional understanding. So professional, it means it refers to the whole discussion on on teaching profession. So is teaching a profession? A profession has certain characteristics, like you have a group, you have certain characteristics, and so on and so on. So this professional understanding definitely refers to a whole theory behind, to which actually Schulman is referring. However, I mean, if we look at the overview by the paper for Schaffel and Kelchtermans in 2013, which is actually unfortunately was done in 2011 and then took them 2 years to publish it, they found out that there is no consensus on the facets of PCK. They looked at all the studies around at 2010, 2011. At this time, not so many publications of TEDS-M in English were around, so TEDS-M is not really covered in their overview, but they looked at all the empirical studies around and really could show that nearly every study developed their own description on conceptualization of math pedagogical content knowledge. And important is what they found out, namely that there are two different paradigms concerning the conceptualization or description of pedagogical content knowledge. And they refer to a very famous quote by Ken Russell and Tim Rowland, who said, whether mathematical knowledge in teaching is located in the head of the individual teacher or is somehow a social asset, meaningful only in the context of its application, is really the important question. I mean, it sounds so trivial, knowledge in the head, or it is so in the social community. But I mean, that is a whole huge discussion where there was a critique about Schurman by Fennemer and Franke, who said, look, you need to include the situational aspect, and that was taken up by other discussion, other conceptualizations too, though it's not, and it's actually taken up this situative aspect in the mathematical quartet. So that is an important discussion, and that has consequences. What you think, what PCK is, pedagogical content knowledge, and even has consequences what you think what professional knowledge is. It's not only the Pepper and others describe it for PCK, but the way what you think, how the professional competencies of teachers are described as situated or cognitively. I mean, that is actually the paradigm or the antagonism that has strong consequences. So if you have the cognitive perspective, then you identify a limited number of components to be part of the pedagogical content knowledge, and your main aim is to distinguish PCK from other categories of the teacher's knowledge base. So it means you want to find out how PCK is different from the general pedagogical knowledge and how it is different from the mathematical knowledge. And then you seek between different relations between these different knowledge facets. If you go for the situated perspective, then you describe PCK as a multidimensional, construct. You have teachers' choices which simultaneously reflect mathematical and pedagogical deliberations. So you see that you describe the professional knowledge or professional competencies of teachers and PCK as part of it, and in a holistic way, where that is a more analytic way, where you really have different components. So, and that has, of course, consequences how you measure. And that's what we discussed already at the beginning or in the last talk, that the way how you measure have consequences for your results. And of course, the way how you describe your construct has consequences for the measurement method and then of the results. So from my point of view, and I mean, I hope that we can have can discuss it tomorrow at the end of the summer school, that, I mean, the main point is there are not objective results. There might, in mathematics, we can have objective results, not in math education. So if you come from a cognitive perspective, you measure PCK independently from the classroom context in which it is used. Most often you use a test, and then afterwards you look for the relations between the different facets of the teacher's knowledge. And if you come from a situated perspective, then you think that, of course, your pedagogical content knowledge only makes sense within the context in which it is enacted. It means you rely on classroom observations. And of course, sometimes you have other data sources like a logbook or whatsoever from your teachers. So the paper said that you need both perspectives because both have pitfalls and shortcomings as well as strengths. And I would like to describe TEDS-M now from another perspective, namely from the perspective as an approach which has a cognitive perspective. I will then continue with the TEDS follow-up study, which tried to incorporate situated relations or situated perspective. And of course, I will close with an outlook on a study which is really even more strongly situated. But still, we want to keep the cognitive basis of TEDS-M. So that is actually the argumentation I want to follow. So, I mean, I don't need to show that, explain that to you now. That is actually the same slide. Teacher Education and Development Study, Learning to Teach Mathematics, carried out in 2008 and published in 2010. So, and that was, as already said, the first large-scale study of higher education with direct testing. And that was something which many people call objective testing. I would not call it objective testing for the reasons we discussed afterwards. There are no objective measurements. So the focus was prospective teachers in their final year of teacher education. And as already explained, we had the primary and the secondary study was looking for primary future teachers and secondary future teachers. Representative samples for TEDS-M, and that is a strong distinction to all the other studies we have carried out afterwards. Getting a representative sample is very costly and very time-consuming and hard to achieve, especially nowadays in Germany, where lots of testing are done, PISA studies regularly done, and then national studies. So the teachers are really, frankly spoken, fed up with being tested all the time, or their students being tested all the time. So that is, so the multi-layered questions of TEDS-M was the professional competencies, the institutional conditions, and the national conditions. So, and as already said, the starting point of TEDS-M are the professional teaching abilities called professional competencies, referring back to the approach by Weinert. And we referred to Schurman, like, for example, the coactive study, and we distinguished content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, and that includes the curricular knowledge, as I already said, and the general pedagogical knowledge. And we had a strong part on the professional beliefs. And see these two different parts of teacher competencies. And what we had instruments, and we had seen items from that, but we did not only have these instruments in which we tested the future teachers. We had a lot of surveys, expert surveys, document analysis of course offerings, and so on and so on. So there was actually a huge data collection which was done and which is only in parts really evaluated. Yes, and as said, and I described to you a few results. We had the subject-related beliefs and the professional knowledge of the future teachers. And the supplementary study concerning general pedagogy. So I skipped the items. Sorry, I should have deleted that. So, and I think I can delete the results as well, because you still remember them, and maybe we can delete that afterwards, even in the PowerPoint I'm sending to you. So, let's follow up. After TEDS-M was finished, we were really thinking about implementing a follow-up study, and there is a project coming up by IAA, a follow-up study, but that they are already discussing for 5 years with Maria Theresa too, whether they should implement this study. It's called First Math, and they want to follow up the future teachers now in the early career in school. And that was actually our idea as well, namely, how do the future teachers develop after they have entered teaching profession? How does their professional knowledge develop? So the question is, how develops mathematics teachers' professional competencies after the end of teacher education in the first years of their school career, based on the framework and the instruments of TETS-M? So we really aim for a longitudinal study, and you know that longitudinal studies are hard to implement and hard to achieve. So it was really a very ambitious idea we followed. And the other aspect, and that is very important, how can we evaluate the professional competence of these teachers in a more performance or more situated way? How can we come closer to what teachers are really doing? So that were actually the two main questions we had, and we wanted to find out how the teacher expertise of teachers develop. So we built on work on concerning expertise and the work on proficiency. That means concerning proficiency, we refer to the framework by Anne Schoenfeld and Jeremy Kirkpatrick, and concerning expertise, we refer to the group around Berliner. And actually, Micheline Chi gave a very nice description about expertise in math education in the book I edited with Yiping Li. So how can we describe expertise? And if we look at all these studies around, there's actually a lot of work around. You can describe high professional competence of teachers as follows. You have a high degree of the integration of knowledge, and you have a lot of links between these different knowledge facets. You have a different or modified categorical perception of teaching situations. Future expert teachers realize teaching situations in a different way. And there is an increased integration of the different dimensions of the professional knowledge. That means you are not only thinking in a mathematical way, but you are always including math pedagogy as well, or general pedagogy. So the knowledge in itself becomes more and more integrated. And especially Kirkpatrick and Schoenfeld emphasized that this concerning, or this developments mean for math pedagogical content knowledge, that you have an increase in the conceptual understanding. And here we mean not conceptual understanding of university mathematics, but of course the school mathematics from a reflective and higher standpoint. So what we call elementary mathematics from a higher standpoint or advanced standpoint, that these kind of concepts are meant over here. Then you have a differentiation of the repertoire of heuristic strategies and metacognitive control strategies. Metacognition is a very strong indicator whether you are an expert or not. Experts have very strong metacognitive control strategies. You have an increase in competence through teaching, and you have an increase in knowledge of school mathematics in depth and in width. So here you have more the conceptual aspects, and here you have in total the knowledge. And I mean, that corresponds to what, I mean, all practicing teachers can report after you have taught all school years, you are educated for once or twice, then you feel secure. And then you can really try to be more innovative. So that is actually can be really described or can be found in the literature. And that is actually the book I have edited with Yiping, and where you can find this very interesting overview by Micheline Chi. And what we did, and now we are coming to noticing, what we did, we enriched actually the original framework of TEDS-M by developing a new framework. And it means we added practice-oriented or situated facets, and we refer to the concept of noticing, which is actually by its whole orientation, action-oriented, and we enriched it with the knowledge-based facets of teacher competency, namely MCK, MPCK, and GPK. It means what we did was we had the knowledge base, the cognitive orientation, and we enriched it with a noticing concept which brought in a situative aspect. So that is actually what we think is pretty new and quite reflective from our point of view. So we have these three situated facets of noticing, and we are referring to the approach by Carter and al. Carter is one member of the Berliner group. So it's actually this very early work of Berliner and others to which we refer. But of course, I mean, the strong American debate with Van Ees and Shereen, Jacobs and Philip, especially this very nice overview, this book, and then the overview in this book is highly recommendable. We do not refer to the approach by Mason, which is on noticing, which is much more on university mathematics oriented. So the first facet is perceiving particular events in instructional setting. That is the terminology of Carter and al. And Van Ees and Shereen or Jacobs and Philip would use the word attending to particular events. So you see that there's something going on. The next one is interpreting the perceived activities in the classroom. It means you make sense of the events in the instructional setting. And the last one is decision making. It means you either anticipate a response to students' activities or you propose an alternative instructional strategy. And with that, and it's actually, if you look at the noticing concept, it will be interesting to hear what kind of noticing concept you use. It's actually a hot discussion, not only how you describe these, they are differently described. The question is decision-making really belonging to noticing? And there are a lot of researchers around, especially Van Ees and originally Shereen, to said decision-making doesn't belong to noticing. Noticing is only the first part. Erickson, in a chapter in this book by Shereen, Jacobs and Philip, he claimed that, I mean, without including the decision-making concept, you would not know what is really going on. So for him, decision-making means developing ideas how to act in classroom. You would not really be powerful. So we included these three facets. So what we did was we carried out TEDS follow-up from 2010 to 2013. So we have already now a lot of results coming in. We did it web-based. It was in 2010 was web-based testing actually really an adventure. If I look nowadays how easy it is to do web-based testing, you can't compare that. At this time, 2010, 2011, it was really complicated. Nowadays, it's very easy and there are enough tools around with doing web-based testing. The reason for web-based testing was that we followed the originally tested teachers, and they were now all over Germany, so you could not drive to somebody and test him. I mean, he or she would be in the north, in the south, or whatsoever. So we had to use web-based testing. So we had the participants from the original participants from TEDS-M, primary and secondary study. And at the end, we ended up with 171 teachers from secondary and 130 teachers from the primary cohort. Of course, you can say that's not a lot. I mean, originally we had 890 teachers over here tested and 1,200 over here. But if you think that we did it on a voluntary basis, I mean, they got a small honorarium, but I mean, it's still, after 4 years, you come back to people and say, look, can you do once more testing? And it was really hard testing. So, I mean, it's hard, and you carry out your own results with teachers. You will see how difficult it is to convince teachers to be tested, to allow you to test them. Very hard. So, we evaluated the professional competencies of the teachers using video vignettes. That was 4 years ago, where video vignettes really something very new, very innovative. Nowadays, video vignettes, with the new technology coming up, it's quite easy to use video vignettes or video clips at this time. But with this video vignettes, which have described short teaching sequences, which deal, among others, effective classroom management. It means it's general pedagogy, heterogeneity, that's math pedagogy and general pedagogy, individualization, teaching strategy, that is mainly math pedagogy, continuation of the teaching sequences with possible teaching options. So you see that a big number of aspects were really covered with these video vignettes. And what we used scripted video clips. That means we had a real teacher and we had real students, but the students knew, and we had a real classroom, but the students knew what they should say. And it is really something that we developed this video clip and said what they should do. The reason behind, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about that. The main reason is all our clips, something about 3 to 4 minutes long. If you want to be so precise in what you want to carry out, you cannot get that in real teaching. It would take you hours over hours, and afterwards you would still not get the answer you actually need. So, I mean, that was the reason for scripted video clips. I know that many, especially American colleagues, think that is not okay, and you need to have really classroom teaching. So the design of TED's follow-up was the following. We had an online questionnaire which we carried out 2 years afterwards, after testing of TED's, and there something about 450 teachers participated, but then we lost even more. So, I mean, with this testing, we had, as already said, 170 and 130 teachers. So we had 3 video vignettes, and we asked with the classroom video, we asked questions, and we evaluated MPCK and GPK. That means, of course, the perception, interpretation, and decision making. Then what we had as well, and that is a very interesting component, although we are struggling a little bit with how to evaluate that. We had a time-limited test. That means the teachers saw 3 answers of students, and they should find out which of the answer is wrong. And they had 4 seconds time. 4 seconds is quite short. Because, I mean, that was very easy errors of students. For example, you add fractions, and you add numerator plus numerator and denominator. I mean, that's a very obvious and very known error, but recognize that within 4 seconds is quite ambitious. So that was the time, and the idea behind is we thought that a proficiency of teachers or teacher expertise really is reflected by fast recognition of errors. We still think that, but we have now the impression that this error recognition needs some kind of special attention. And then we had the original MCK and PCK test. We reduced the mathematical test significantly because 2/3 of the testing time was done with math and only 1/3 for MPCK. We have now gone to 1 hour. It means we even enriched MPCK a little bit and we shortened MCK. And then we had a reduced version of GPK, and all these original paper and pencil tests were digitalized. So you see, our test design was quite demanding. So we always asked the teachers to stop after this testing, because it was already something about 2.5 hours, and that was something about 1.5 hours. So really stop and have yourself a rest. Teachers did that at home. Of course, that means you can't control the conditions, but we had time restrictions in it. So the teachers were told when they could make a break and when they should not make a break. Of course, but usually it worked. Teachers did take that very seriously. So I would now like to show you a shortened example of a video vignette. I mean, because that shows you really how the video vignette looks like. And I will then refer to that tomorrow when we talk about video studies. So the context information, it's a video sequence from a math classroom in a German comprehensive school. It means mixed ability. And the class not only concerning math abilities, but concerning cultural background. They are quite heterogeneous. I guess you know that Germany had a high number of immigrants in the last 50 years, especially in the last years with people originally coming from Turkey. So the mathematical background is the following. You have the following question. On a farm, there are geese and cows. Altogether, there are 105 animals. And there are 4 times as much geese than cows on the farm. So, I mean, that is a very well-known question. I mean, we do that in grade 6 or 7. And I mean, how many geese and how many cows are on the farm? I mean, graphically, you can even do it in primary education. So, that was the mathematical background. And I now want to show the video, and I hope that the sound is working.
Ihr seht die Aufgaben an der Tafel. Das ist die erste Gleichung gemeinsam. Schon jemand? Alles gut?
G plus K gleich 105.
Marie?
Dasselbe.
Sven? Das hatte ich auch. Kann jemand diese Gleichung erklären? Sarah?
Die Gänse und wir sind zusammengekommen.
Hat jemand Fragen, Einwände oder Anmerkungen dazu? Okay, jetzt überlege ich bitte hier für sich allein die zweite Gleichung machen.
Fertig. Ist genau die gleiche.
Bin fertig?
Nein.
Gut. Ergebnisse. 1, 2, 3, wieder.
Hier das Ergebnis kann aber nicht stimmen. Weil wenn man jetzt 4 mal 20 einsetzt, ist ja gleich 80, dann 20 ist das G und 80 das K, dann wäre ja mehr Q als Gänse. Hä?
Okay, so I hope you could see it, but somebody was working. You put things in the Dropbox. So. Okay, where is it? So on this, I mean, you saw the video, and I guess something similar could have happened here in Turkey as well. I mean, a lesson like that could not happen in Asia. I mean, not at least not in East Asia, because I mean, this kind of, you could easily see that was not good teaching. I mean, there were a lot of aspects concerning poor classroom management. I mean, the students were bored. The teacher didn't act. So, I mean, that was, of course, deliberately built in because we asked afterwards a lot of questions about classroom management. So we had a lot of, and I mean, that would be totally impossible in East Asia. That even if you have a lot of students misbehaving, they would never ever do something like that. So, but at least in Germany, that was usual teaching. So we had concerning math pedagogical content knowledge and general pedagogy, we had a lot of items with using Likert scales. That means strongly agree, do not agree, and strongly disagree. And then we had a lot of open items, and we had Likert scales concerning perceiving and interpreting. It means the students' answers had to be evaluated from a mathematical point of view. Then we had open items on decision-making concerning general pedagogy. And that is what I meant with this prevention of classroom disturbances. I mean, it was so obvious that the teacher did not do something. So one question was, of course, what could the teacher have done in order to prevent these kind of disturbances? That means, of course, stop early and so on. So then we had open items concerning MPCK on perceiving and on interpreting. It means the students' arguments should have been rephrased. And then, of course, the description of the students' misconceptions of variables should be described. And I mean, you have all recognized that. That's the reason why I like this video very much, although we did not use it afterwards because the psychometrical values of this video were not as good as the others. That's the reason why we have said we can't use that and why we are now using it in talks. I mean, concerning MPCK, there is this very well-known misconception of variables. I mean, it was first published by Rostick and Clement, I think in one of the very first issues of GRME. And here, I mean, you could very clearly see as a quantity of the entity, and there is no distinction between entity and variable. And if you remember, the teacher asked for the first equation, can somebody explain it? And the girls say, the cows and geese are together 105. And of course, the question, the correct rephrase, and then the teacher should have said, look, it's not the cows and the geese, it's the number of cows and the numbers of geese who all together form 105. So that was the question or the underlying misconception we were looking for, and hoped that the teachers would realize that. So we had a very extensive coding manual. Actually, I mean, the coding manual was something about 200 or 300 pages long. Where we developed that out of the material. I mean, that is a usual way of text analysis, that you develop your coding manual out of the actual material. So we had correct, semi-correct, and wrong answers. And we used the exemplification of correct, semi-correct, and wrong answers, verbatim answers of the participants. So example item was, Kira's answer for G equals K is not correct if K refers to cows and G refers to geese. Kira's answer is possibly based on a misconception of variables. Please describe this misconception. And of course, if you would have been very correct, then you would have said, you would have needed to say, if K refers to the number of cows and G refers to the number of geese. But if you write that in the example item, you give away the answer. Because, I mean, if you say it so explicitly, everybody knows, oh, it's about the misconception of saying cows and geese instead of number of cows and number of geese. So, I mean, it's not totally wrong because we say K refers, it's not K is. I mean, that is a distinction. So, I mean, it's something which is a very small problem, but really how to develop items which are clear and precise and not giving the answer away is something which is very complicated. So correct answer was, she translated the wording 4 times more geese, literally in the mathematical language rather than multiplying the number of cows. So she uses the variable as a mere substitute in the spoken language. So you see very clearly that this teacher saw very clearly where the problems of these girls come from. So what did we find out? I mean, that it's interesting now, you know a lot about what is going on. I mean, tomorrow we will describe in more detail the advantages of this video-based research, which is nowadays really a very powerful approach. And we just had a special issue of the International Journal of Science and Math Education, edited by Sigrid Blömeke and David Clark and myself, on video-based research, and there is another one, a ZDM issue coming up. So it's actually really a very powerful way of evaluating in a situated way the professional competencies of teachers or even of students. So what did we find out? We have now first results published. I mean, you can say, look, we started in 2010, 2011. Actually, we submitted our first papers in 2013, and they were first published in 2015. So it simply takes at least 1 year. Yes. So this whole issue of the International Journal of Science and Math Education has just appeared. Then in 2016, the first issue on ZDM mathematics education will be devoted to that, and of course other papers will be in. We have a paper in teacher and teacher education, and then we have a lot of, or at least several papers in German journals. And we have mainly concentrated on the secondary study. In the ZDM issue, there will be a few primary or results of the primary study too. So, what did we find out? First of all, we received quite interesting insight into the structure and development of the professional knowledge of early career teachers. If you think about what would you think how the mathematical knowledge and the math pedagogical knowledge would develop? Then you would think, okay, the mathematical knowledge, which at least refers partly to university mathematics, you would expect that the knowledge in this competence facet would go down. I mean, teachers are practicing less university mathematics. They are usually doing school mathematics. So, I mean, this facet should go down, and it was indeed a significant decrease of the average level. So it was, but it was not as strong, by the way, as we had expected that. So when it comes to MPCK, we had expected, because it is this declarative knowledge, I mean the very strongly cognitively oriented kind of math pedagogical content knowledge, we had expected, because that is more declarative knowledge, we had expected that this average level of MPCK would go down as well, but that was not the case. It remained stable. So that was really surprising for us that it did not go down. And one reason why we think it hasn't gone down is, I mean, we already know that practical experience is a very strong opportunity to learn. It's not an academic opportunity to learn, but it is a practical opportunity to learn. So apparently the teachers had, as Schoenfeld and Kilpatrick assumed, had a chance to really, stabilize their MPCK. And we interpret that as, the practical experience as learning opportunity. But you see once more that is an explanation. You have two results, and then the question is, how can you interpret them? We have given interpretations, and of course you can say, look, that's not convincing. Then we would need to come up with other explanations. What we then did afterwards was, and that is a very powerful and very simple analysis, we analyzed the rank order. That means we looked who was good in mathematics at the beginning, at the end of teacher education, and how did this person do in the ranking after 4 years of teaching practice. So, and that is very interesting concerning the differences between MPCK and MCK. So, in mathematical knowledge, the rank order remains nearly unchanged. That means if you were good in mathematics at the end of teacher education, you still were good after 4 years of teaching practice. And when you were poor at the end of teacher education, you are still poor. I mean, that is a result which is not very encouraging, because, I mean, apparently no learning gain within mathematics. But on the other hand, I mean, apparently mathematics is much more stable kind of a knowledge than, yes, and you will see in a minute what happened to MPCK. Because in MPCK, the situation was quite varied. So you had a strong a change in the rank order. That means, of course, on the one hand, the level of MPCK at the end of teacher education still predicted significantly the knowledge after 4 years of teaching, but the rank order changed significantly. That means somebody who was poor at the end of teacher education suddenly really did very well, and the other way around. And we interpret it in such a way that the MPCK of young teachers at the beginning of the teaching career is much more flexible. And so, a few teachers, young teachers, take up experience as a strong opportunity to learn, and others are simply overtaxed and have no chance to really learn something. I mean, if you think about that, and of course, it's obvious that you can either learn from teaching, or you can say, look, I simply feel overtaxed and I only want to survive. I mean, we all know that you have these two different kinds of types of early career students. Some who really say, look, I'm fighting, but I'm learning, and others say, look, I'm only overtaxed. And that apparently leads to this very different ways of these different results in mathematical content knowledge and math pedagogical content knowledge. And I mean, one idea is, we have published one paper, Niels Buchholz, one of my PhD students, was the lead author, that you have different, that MPCK and MCK are quite different in their nature, and that you can have actually different perspectives on math pedagogical content knowledge, whether it's more strongly shaped by content or by interaction. So I think there is a variety of explanation for this around, and as already said, the explanation is the important aspect. So, and something else which was very unexpected to us as well, concerns the nature of teacher expertise, because I said, look, we want to see how is the expertise of teachers developing. And we had distinguished between the whole knowledge facets, it's everything which is the old original TETS-M tests, and the new facet, perceiving, interpreting, and acting. And we had, as said, a third facet, we had the speed of students' error recognition. And the question is, how are these three domains related? And we couldn't neither distinguish a content-related nor a pedagogical-oriented facet, because you could think, look, there is something like which is pedagogy, that means that is everything concerning perception, and then on the other hand, you have everything concerning knowledge. That is not the case, but what we really found out was a two-dimensional model. We couldn't establish a three-dimensional model, and mainly the reason was that the data are not strong enough, or not high enough, the number of test persons. So what we had was, in one knowledge facet, we have a content-related knowledge facet covering math, mathematical knowledge, math pedagogy, and speed in math error recognition. And then the more performance-related competencies, it just means we have general pedagogy, perceiving, interpreting, and acting. And actually, I mean, there is a lot of, we had last week a discussion in my working group another time about this result, because there are actually two unexpected results in it. First of all, why is speed in mathematics error recognition close to math and math pedagogy? And it's even closer to mathematics than to math pedagogy. What are we really measuring? I mean, these are students' errors, very simple students' errors. Why is it so close to mathematics, to mathematical knowledge? It was very, and we really had expected, I mean, if you see a student error, you act under time pressure, that this would be something like perceiving, noticing, close connection to the noticing concept. Not the case. So, I mean, we will talk about these results at the early conference, and it's, for us, it was very unexpected. And unexpected was that general pedagogy is so close to this actually performance-related competencies, because GPK was originally a paper and pencil test and contained a lot of declarative knowledge. But apparently the kind of items which describes that kind of text vignettes, pedagogical situations, bring that very close to this PID. So that was for us a very, very unexpected results. So, and then if we think a bit more about this perceiving and interpreting, what does that really mean? And first of all, I mean, there a really long discussion about that. What do we really mean by noticing? But if we look at perceiving and interpreting, then first we can see that these are different dimensions, but they are only loosely connected. I mean, if you think of that, you would expect at the beginning, look, you cannot interpret anything if you haven't perceived it. But because we measured that differently, you can measure the competence in perceiving and the competence in interpreting, and they are apparently different. I mean, that was for us a very important aspect, and we can discuss about it afterwards if you wish. And something else, that general pedagogy apparently is reorganized during the early career phase, the transition into teaching phase as well, because there is not a strong relation between the original level of general pedagogy at the end of teacher education and what we measured. So we were not really able to predict the results in TEDS follow-up by the results in TEDS-M. So here, some kind of reorganization takes place as well as it was done with math pedagogical content knowledge. So, and that is something which is very important, that the current level of the general pedagogy is really strongly influencing the ability to interpret, but not the ability to perception. And there are results around that this ability to interpret is much more theoretically guided, whereas the ability to perceive something is something which is strongly guided by the beliefs. If I have the impression, no disturbances by students can take place, it will take me quite a long time until I realize that in the back one of the students is talking. So, I mean, that is something, if I don't want to see anything because it doesn't belong to my belief system, it will take me a long time to perceive something. Whereas for the interpretation, you actually really need a lot of knowledge. So, I mean, that is a kind of interpretation we have for this result, which is, from our point of view, quite astonishing. And something else what we did, we looked at, I've already emphasized several times that the results are strongly dependent on the way how you measure it. So, and what we did was a qualitative oriented analysis of MPCK and GPK, and we looked at, yes, MPCK and GPK, and we looked at what did we measure with this digitalized original paper and pencil test, that means the TEDS-M test, and what did we measure with the situated video-based test. And we actually did a very fine-grained analysis in which we looked in which tests which group behaved in which way. So we use this self-developed method of median split. They we really looked qualitatively how special groups of teachers behaved in which way. And what we found out was for our, was not unexpected, but it confirmed strongly the relation between the instrument and the results, or the theoretical framework and the result. Because if you have this more qualitatively situated or practice-oriented evaluation of general pedagogy and math pedagogical content knowledge, then you identify a lot of commonalities between general pedagogy and math pedagogical content knowledge. Whereas if you have this paper and pencil test, then which is strongly cognitively oriented, then you really bring out the differences between these two domains. So here, the domains are getting smaller and smaller, and you find out many commonalities. And here with the paper and pencil test, you find out a lot of differences between these two domains. And that has apparently to do with the way how you evaluate the data, and that you, of course, use items which really bring in from a theoretical point of view the differences, because you have theories in mind how these two domains are different. So it really shows once more, and that's from my point of view a very interesting result, that the way of description of constructs and the measurement methods really influence the results. Yeah, that was a few results about TED's follow-up, and there are a lot more to come and a lot more already around. How do we want to continue? And we have called this new study TED's Instruct, and we call that actually the acid test of TED's M, or the litmus test, or however you want to call that. What we are doing with TED's Instruct is the third part of this triad. We had TED's M, professional knowledge of future teachers at the end of teacher education. We try to become more situated with early career teachers. And now what we want to do, we want to combine the professional knowledge, the professional competencies of teachers with the growth of the students' achievements. Actually, there are two studies around which have already done that. It's the coactive study and the LMT study. Both have connected students' achievements. LMT study is concentrated on primary students and primary teachers, and coactive on secondary students and secondary teachers. And the main problem, the data, at least for coactive, the data are 12 years old, and the data of LMT study are not very young as well. So we wanted to find out whether we can replicate the results of these studies. And of course, we want to find out how valid our measurement instruments are. Can we really come closer to some kind of patterns of teachers' competencies in the promotion of students' learning? We have started this study last year. We think that in 2017, right after 1813, we will have some results. It's simply we are in the process of the data are coming in, and I mean, we will have some first results already at the end of this year, but I mean, the really full results will actually not be before 2017. We have selected 2 federal states of Germany. First of all, Hamburg as a metropolitan area with a high number of migrant students. I mean, you could see it in the video. There were enough students with migrant background. And Thüringen. Thüringen is a more rural area in the former GDR. It's quite in the middle. And the interesting is that Thüringen is one of the high-performing federal states in math education, whereas Hamburg is one of the poorer performing federal states in mathematics when it comes to student achievements. What we are going to plan is we will use the instruments and the framework of TED's follow-up, and we will simply use this instrument as it is. We had a long discussion whether we should try to enrich the framework and enrich the test, because we know the items are already 10 years old from TETS-M, so you know now much better how you would do that. But if you use other items, you cannot do any comparisons anymore. I mean, that is the problem. If you change something, then you can't do comparisons with other standards. So we have simply left the instruments of TETS follow-up as they are, and we are evaluating students who are being taught between grade 7 to grade 9, and we are evaluating the teachers who are teaching these students, and it's grade 7 to grade 9, and something which is, from my point of view, indeed a very innovative component, and I hope that we are able to publish at least a description of the instrument at the end of this year. We are carrying out extensive classroom observations, and we developed a new instrument taking up descriptions of the group by Deborah Ball and others. There are a lot of studies around in Germany, so we took some kind of items from them and developed something new. And I hope with this interesting classroom, the results from the classroom observations, we are getting even more closer to what teachers are really doing, and that we really can find out afterwards what are the reasons for quality in math education. But that is something which I may be able to present in 2017. So thank you very much. So I think we have time for discussion, or is already coffee break? No. Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
I think I missed the point, but I wonder that you mentioned noticing notions in MCK, mathematical content knowledge, and in mathematical pedagogical content knowledge. But you also mentioned that there is significant difference from the beginning to the end in MCK and MPCK.
Yes.
And I couldn't see that how noticing, what is the role of noticing in such differences? Maybe I couldn't follow this part. I see the GPK part, but
Okay. So that was the rank order. So I'm trying to sort out what where the question is aiming for. So we measured concerning the mathematical content knowledge and math pedagogical content knowledge and general pedagogy. We measured the rank order and how it developed. So it was actually really a longitudinal analysis. Yes. But I mean, for the PIT, as we call it, perception, interpretation, and decision making, we can't have any longitudinal analysis because we didn't measure it at the end of teacher education. Because the design of TETS follow-up was, that is actually only that one. Only that is TETS-M. So here are the original test items. And then we had this error recognition test, which is a new one. And then we have here, we have actually the PID facets. And these PID are, on the one hand, you measure perception, interpretation, and decision making. But on the other hand, of course, this PIT, as we call it, is connected either to math pedagogy or to general pedagogy. So you are either focusing, for example, on classroom disturbances, then it would be general pedagogy, or you are focusing on this misconception concerning the understanding of variables, then it would be math pedagogy. So I didn't get really the point where the PIT came in, or the noticing problem. Because we only measured noticing, only once. I mean, with sets follow up.
I misunderstood some point in research. I thought that in the beginning and in the process and in the end that you look at noticing of the teachers while you are asking MPCK and GPK questions to them. I think you measured also their noticing while you are asking the questions.
What we did, we had Likert scales and open items. So it was one testing. And we had, for example, we had these items, for example, on perceiving and interpreting. And of course, they are focused on NPCK. But it is, I mean, first of all, it's only one test. So only once, I mean, something about 2 hours, and then afterwards 1 hour. So, and we asked them, special aspects, and these noticing aspects are connected either to math pedagogy or to general pedagogy. So, maybe I guess I wasn't clear enough. I mean, it's always the problem to describe a very complicated design study in half an hour, in 1 hour. Yes.
You mentioned you measured teachers' knowledge. What about teacher skills? Learning, teaching skills. Teaching skills.
I mean, that is Text Instruct, the teaching skills.
Did you measure?
No, we couldn't. Because look, they were sitting in front of a laptop and they were answering. They saw this video and then they had this explanation of the video, for example, and we even gave them the results so that they didn't start to calculate because that would cost time and then they would come to difficulties and then, okay. So we gave them the questions and the results, and then we asked afterwards questions. How that is related to their actual teaching behavior. I mean, you can think that somebody who has a high knowledge in mathematics and math pedagogy and general pedagogy, that this person will be able to display that in practice, but actually you don't know. So, I mean, if you really want to find out how strong the relation between knowledge and action is, you have to go into classroom. And that is what we really want to do with Text Instruct. And the problem is, we first were aiming for videotaping or videotapes, because that was done in earlier studies. For example, Deborah Ball and others, they had videotapes. And they showed, and then afterwards, from the videotapes of the teachers' actions, there were then they did the evaluation of the quality of their teaching. It's nowadays in Germany nearly impossible to do any videotaping, at least with a bigger group of teachers. That is, I mean, we are now in the order of 100 teachers in Hamburg. I mean, if you think how many teachers are really teaching grade 7 to 8 in Hamburg schools, that's something about a quarter. I mean, if you want then to do videotaping and then you give back the relation between the results of the students, how strongly the students being taught by these teachers, how strong their competencies increase, the students, teachers' behaviors, and the professional competencies of the teachers. I mean, no one would ever allow you to enter the classroom. It is simply too dangerous. I mean, that is, you open yourself totally. I mean, it always would be nice to have it, nice to have, but we were really afraid. We didn't ask for that afterwards because it was obvious that this is politically far too hot. It's a very hot discussion. So, I mean, if you have a huge country and you have 1% of the teachers, yes. And even, I mean, even Thuringia, they are not bigger. I mean, Hamburg has 1.8 million inhabitants. I mean, less, something about a tenth of Istanbul. I mean, if we could do that in Istanbul, because if we have 100 teachers in Istanbul, that's nothing. Nobody would recognize others. But I mean, in Hamburg, being much smaller, that is much more complicated. Yes, I mean, it would be nice, yes.
I'm going to ask a question that came from email. So that's not my personal question. So it's about the certificate program. So I mentioned a little bit about the certificate program in Turkey. Like we have a faculty of education that who get educated from faculty of education becomes teacher, because they get the certificate. From other faculties, from other departments, the students need to get a certificate program. And after that, they become a teacher. And also we have a lot of graduates of faculty of education who are still waiting to become teachers. So the question is asking you, would you still be applying certificate program for other departments for them to become teachers? If you were in the position to make that decision.
I myself, or
if you are a decision maker.
Yes.
And you have a faculty of education that produce teachers, and there are other faculties, maybe faculty of arts and science and other faculties. And then you have a chance them to give a certificate program, 3 months, 6 months, whatever you do, and they become teachers. And there are a lot of faculty of education graduates who are ready to be teachers. So would you allow the certificate program?
I mean, we have now a hot discussion about a similar question in Germany. Namely, shall we have schools of education which are really, I mean, actually holding the whole certificate program? It means they are buying in the whole teaching, for example, from the mathematicians, but they are running everything. They have the responsibility. I mean, we would love to have that, because that really would mean that you can tell mathematicians who are not interested in teaching future teachers, because they may not be qualified enough or whatsoever. You can simply tell them, look, your lecture is not good enough. You either improve or we'll ask somebody else. That is simply not possible. I mean, nowadays, at Hamburg University, a seventh of all of our students are teacher students. But still, we don't have any position to tell the mathematicians, or for example, when it comes to language teachers, our people who are teaching the teachers who want to become a German teacher in a very poor way. They are simply not interested in these students, but we can't do anything against that. So, I mean, having the power of really deciding who has the money and really steering within one school of education, steering the whole teacher education would be definitely a very big step forward. But I know, for example, from South Korea, they have at many of the universities, they have very strong schools of education. And for example, they employ the mathematicians. It means the math teaching is done within the School of Education. So you have special mathematicians who are really interested in teacher education. And I would think that at the long run as a big step forward, but in Germany, I definitely will not realize that anymore, because many other faculties live from teacher education. That means they are taking the resources and they are not really doing a lot out of that.
Thank you. shall we give a break for 3 minutes for a cup of tea?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Or cup of
Let's
coffee.
have a yes, cup of coffee.
Yes. So. Yes.
We give an example about teacher.
Yeah.
It is just like discipline.
No, I mean, when you would, I mean, we actually are replicating that study with now in China. Yes, we got a grant for that. So, I mean, and we need to discuss how this, the videos will be done in China. But, I mean, the teacher must be much more strict. I mean, that means the students are not allowed to laugh or something like that. And you know, for example, this presentation at the blackboard, it would be difficult.
What do you think? Is that better?
No, it is difficult because we have less students activities in China. So I mean, you really need to find out what kind of video is really addressing the way how the Chinese teachers teach. It's much more directed. You know, the teacher is sitting here, and then the students are doing their single work, and yeah, yeah.
Would you observe any of the participants?
Sorry?
Would you observe any of the participants?
Oh, I mean, with text follow, text instruct, we had started.
Just start.
Just started. So we only work know that the instrument works. I mean, that is the only thing which is nice to know that the instrument works, but that's it.
Okay.
Oh, yes, it would be lovely.
What kind of you will plan evaluate observations? What kind of observations are written?
Yes, if you have a look at the dynamic, actually what we do is it is some kind of quantitatively oriented classroom observation. It means two raters will sit in the back and they have a list.
In real time, you will.
Yes, we do that in video. Well, I mean, with video you would have much more time. So actually, they are really sitting in the back, and then they will rate every 10 minutes. They will rate a list of, I think it's something about 80 aspects. So concerning, for example, the quality of the instruction concerning mathematics, then construct the support of the students, that means how strongly the students were addressed, then something like classroom management and orientation towards the students, and what else? Yes, and actually the efficiency of classroom management.
In every 10 minutes,
Yes,
you will evaluate the
80 items, yes.
It's different than the what participants evaluate in video tape.
Oh, thank you very much. It's wonderful. Sure.
I'm sorry, and it's different than what participants do in TED follow-up.
Look, in text follow-up, they only saw a video and then they answered questions. But now we are really sitting in the back of actual teaching. And so we are really evaluating it, and at the end, hopefully we will be able to find out that, for example, classroom management of somebody is very good, but whenever it comes to, let's say, what we call it quality-oriented teaching, it means when you have to develop a new concept very clearly, and you have to give the students an explanation to really introduce the concept. When it comes to students' areas, whenever something like that happens, then the teacher fails. So we hope that we can find out some kind of patterns. And that, for example, then we can realize that maybe this teacher who is wonderful in classroom management, but poor in cognitive activation, and in quality in math instruction. That this teacher has a poor mathematical knowledge, quite poor math pedagogical content knowledge, but a very high pedagogical knowledge. So if we could find this kind of relations, we can say, look, if you are good enough, that leads to better teaching in this respect, and hopefully then we can find relations to the progress of the students, because we are not looking for the absolute value of the students. We only look for their progress in 1 year. Because I mean, if you have very poor students and they doesn't say anything, so it is the progress which is measured. And then we really want to look for patterns. And it's not that you say, look, this teacher is poor and that is better. Then you really look for patterns of, like I just said, look, somebody is good in this passage, and for example, he simply doesn't perceive what is going on in classroom. Therefore, he cannot really interpret it afterwards. He's doing then something wrongly because he has already not perceived what is going on in the back. So of these kind of patterns we hope, and I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of teachers around who are poor in mathematics, math education, but who have a very high general pedagogic feeling. And
is that really hard enough for you?
Yes,
okay.
It's wonderful. Yes, wonderful. So I mean, we expect that.
You are doing this research now.
It has done. They have done. The instrument for the classroom observations is developed. We are just in the process of writing it up, and we had piloted it, and we could show that the instrument is valid and reliable. And they have started, I think, 3 weeks ago. So, and we will do something about, at least in Hamburg, something about 40 teachers, and we visit them something about 2 times, and we have 90 minutes teaching periods in Hamburg now. That means we see them 2 times 90 minutes. So
90 minutes.
Yes. So actually it was 45, and now in at least in many, it's not always 90 minutes, but most of the time you have 90 minutes. Sometimes you have only 45.
Also, we do measure teachers, students' achievement level.
So because there is there are tests done in Hamburg, because the situation in Germany is nowadays like that you cannot do own measurement of student achievements, because we have the PISA study, we have this kind of federal states measurements where all the students within Germany are compared according to the federal states, where Hamburg is always in the back at the bottom, and Thuringia and Saxony are always in the top. So you can't do own testing, and it's not necessary, because the federal state of Hamburg is carrying out nearly every year some kind of testing in mathematics and in German and in the first language. So, and we are using this test, and then we look what is the progress.
Okay, not your own testing, but
that actually, I mean, you can't develop that as well. Yeah, I mean, it would be nice, but actually it would not be possible. It would not be allowed.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to ask a question, if we have a time.
Yes.
You mentioned about Asian countries look math as a static. They remind some theories and memorization, but in European countries, more dynamic compared to Asian countries. When we look at the PISA results, the high score is Asian countries, and PISA said that PISA measure the problem solving, mathematical modeling, and mathematical literacy students, and Asian countries get high score. I have a conflict. They make all the time memorizing and remember the theories, but their score is higher than the Europe. How could you evaluate this situation?
I mean, the situation is that I mean, in PISA, they are measuring literacy. I mean, what they say. But on the other hand, it's a lot of algorithmic items in it as well. So, I mean, it's not the case that they are only measuring reflection. That's simply not the case. And it's really the question, what are they really measuring in this PISA? And on the other hand, I mean, these were the teachers thinking at the end of teacher education. I mean, we have actually not evaluated the teachers' beliefs of the early career teachers' beliefs. It could be that the beliefs of the early career teachers have changed towards a more transmission-oriented view. Because that was at the end, it has measured at the end of teacher education. And we know that practice is, on the other hand, bringing out more conservative thinking models. So it would be interesting to find out with the early career teachers what kind of beliefs they have. We have them measured, but haven't evaluated that so far.
Okay. Okay. In Asia, procedural knowledge is learned. I think content knowledge is far more than procedural knowledge.
I mean, they are not only learning by heart. That's not true. They are learning a lot by heart. But on the other hand, I mean, if you learn and practice a lot, I mean, the Asian students think, or it's Asian philosophy, if you learn a lot and if you practice and practice and practice, that will enhance your understanding. And I mean, it's difficult for us to understand because we first we understand and then you practice. I mean, I would say that both thinking have their right.
They are wrong. Also.
Yes, because I mean, you better understand something if you practice it.
And also, if you're understanding, you can also practice more.
Yes, because you know why you are practicing it.
Yes.
So, I mean, it is a complicated situation, yes. It's not so easy. It's not only that you can say, look, go to China, and then you know what you can do. I mean,
their students, you say that they hardworking, and I think I remember from an article, nearly in day 4 or 5 hours they sleep in high school students.
They are definitely working much harder than at least the German students. I would think the Turkish students too. Yes, I mean that is simply true. But on the other
there's
hand,
the social conditions for that, I think also.
Yes, I mean it is expected by the parents. And on the other hand, I mean I have already told that many people in Shanghai. Let's wait and see how it will be in 20 years. Because I mean now the Chinese students realize that you can have a better life, not only consisting of work. I mean, they are only working.
Like that.
Yes, and I mean, if you see, and of course, I mean, that's the reason why China is trying to close the borders. Because when you are in China, you don't have access to Google. It's closed. So you only have access to several parts of the internet. And I mean, and they cannot really close China because the students the kids find some way how to look at YouTube. They still know how to do that. So I mean, I'm pretty sure in 10 years' time we will already realize changes because in Japan there are already a lot of changes. The Japanese colleagues are complaining that the students are not working hard anymore. Because they see what's going on in other parts of the world. So, I mean.
Also, after the practicing teachers, like 5 years or 6 years, they will become like old teachers.
Mm.
They can look their examples for their old teachers. You mentioned about wash up their university education. They start to work like their old teachers, how it's work in the school they work. And it's something complicated, I think. It's something very we should think about that. How we can change this situation.
Yes, definitely.
Like my sister is a teacher, and also after she graduated from university, she worked as a teacher in primary school, and there is a rural area. Students don't have any books, any like that. So she wants to give them books. She buy them with her own money. Yeah, and she gives their students. But after that, her director said, "You can't do that. If you do that, they will ask
The
for
others
us."
too, yes.
And there is also something like that. There's a bureaucracy. It's not political issues. You can, although you wanted to do something, there are so many people you can do it.
Yes, of course.
What you want.
And I know it from South America that you have many poor children over there who come to school who don't have any, any pencils, any papers, and it's obvious why the results of South American students are so poor.
It's also something, we should think about.
Yes. So I go to the washroom. I think then we have to start.
Biz verimli olarak formatını demek. Onu biri nasıl düşünüyor? Gerek bazen değil. Bizim böyle barışıyor ki. Yani boş bir düşünce içine girmiş olacağım diyeceksin. Yani öyle bir şey yok. Padişahlar var böyle düşüneceksin. Padişahlar var böyle. Sen de öyle söyledin. Arda söylüyorsun.
Tamam işte bir de kurgu işi bu. Yani 5 yıl zaten eskisi değil. Eskisinde de zaten kapanıkta zaten var.
Bir yerde değil mi? Atıyorum. Kalitesinde de var mı?
Senin düzeltme yaptığın 5 yıl üzerinden değil mi zaten? 4 yıl.
Ama biz ama program ilgilenmediği için ne içiyor? O
Onlar ne bileyim. O işte.
hiçbir şey yok.
Ya çok güzel ya.
Ama çok şanslı. Bir odasında kalmış model anlatıyor.
Doğru yanlış olur. Doğru yanlış araştırmalara bak. Bilimsel araştırmalar seni yönlendirir. Şu an şu yanımızda biyolojik çalışmalar geçmiş kullanılmış bir şey kullanılıyor. Bazıları çevirdiği maybe işte çalışıyor.
So was it better with the micro?
Yes, I guess.
Okay. At least somebody could ask one question. So they can see something from the video, or?
No, the video is in here.
Oh,
So what
okay.
I'm doing is I'm just like putting the PowerPoint on the screen. This is over the PowerPoint screen. So,
Oh, okay.
And I'm just like
So
passing
they-
through the slides as you like pass
Okay,
through the
that
slides.
means they only see the slides and they hear my voice. I mean, yes.
Yes, like sometimes I just like move to your picture at the, for example, the last question and answer part. It was you on the screen.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was switching back and forth.
Yes, I mean, as long as somebody understands something. I mean, it's,
So it's been like only earlier. 18 people was watching. Now it's like 8 people watching. So
yes, I mean, it's a long time, isn't it?
yeah, but
I mean-
it's pretty amount of like people are watching. So it's not bad.
So, last session today, you are doing remarkably well. I mean, it's very difficult, especially after lunch, then to keep concentration. So, theme of this afternoon is scientific standards and how to meet scientific standards in a study and or publication. And the reason why I've put up this theme and proposed that is, I mean, you all have to carry out a study and write either a thesis as a master's thesis or a PhD thesis. So, I mean, publications are really the hard currency nowadays when it comes to, academic career. So, I mean, how to meet the standards of, the scientific standards, especially of a journal, is very important. And I refer actually what I'm describing to you now, actually to my experience as being an editor-in-chief of a journal. And you may have already heard from this journal, ZDM, Math Education. And you may have heard about this journal with the following title, ZDM, the International Journal on Math Education. Actually, the very strange ZDM goes back to because it was originally a German journal, Zentralblatt für Didaktik der Mathematik. So that was the original title, and because it was abbreviation ZDM, we kept that when Springer offered to publish that in 2007. So since 2007, we are published with Springer. And then we realized that actually there are two subtitles around, because the main title is ZDM, and then there was actually a subtitle around mathematics education. And so we decided to go to this quite easier title and hope that nowadays everybody is, quoting that correctly. And what we are doing with ZDM, we are publishing 7 issues per year. And we have only thematic issues. That means each issue has a special theme. I will pass around two of these issues. One is an evidence-based continuous professional development, scaling up sustainable interventions by Bettina Röstl-Winter, Celia Hoyes, and Sigrid Blümeke. And the other one, Language and Communication in Math Education by Candia Morgan, Tracy Craig, Markus Schütte, and David Wagner. So we always have, for each issue, we have a guest editor, group of guest editors, and we have a theme. And these guest editors invite special people, and then we have an issue with coming about 10 to 12 papers. Because last night somebody asked me, what is the rejection rate of ZDM? That is quite low, because we work on invitation only. The being invited is already the honor. And then, I mean, we reject quite seldom because we really want to cover a whole picture. I give round these 2 issues if you want to have a look. But that is actually my experience. I'm running this journal as editor-in-chief since 2003. And my explicit goal is to do it until we are in the Science Citation Index. Maybe you have heard it is now very important to be indexed in special services like ERIC, Scopus, and so on. And what is very important is the Science Citation Index by Thomson & Reuters. It's an American brand, and they are actually really indexing special journals, and that is being in the Science Citation Index is something which, yes, being on the highest level. We have applied for that, and we will see in 2 years' time how the outcome will be. So, and until we are in the Science Citation Index, at least until then, I'm going to continue as editor-in-chief. So, I would like to start with some common problems of beginners and experienced researcher while setting up a study or publishing a paper. And actually, I mean, setting up a study or publishing a paper, it has many things in common because similar errors can take place. So something which is a list far from being complete is the following. And that is something which is an error which happens to experienced researchers as well. That is sometimes something which is really surprising to me. There is no clear research question or no problem stated. I mean, that is very strange. that you set up a study, you write a paper, and you do not describe what your research question is you're going to answer. You won't believe, but a third of the papers of the original submissions receive this kind of feedback by me. No clear research question. Then there is no coverage of the state of the art. That means it's not said what is really going on as discussion. The literature is quite outdated. That is something which is very strange that you have, and that has to do that people tend to go back to other studies, and then they simply go back and repeat the old literature and do not do their own literature study. And quite often, there is no reference to the international debate. I mean, even if we are publishing a paper in a German or a Turkish journal, one would expect that you are really referring to the international discussion. Then there is no theoretical frame described, or the theoretical frame is only roughly described. I mean, that is really a big problem. And I mean, that was the reason why I described so strictly the theoretical frame of TEDxM and went back to that all the time, because that is, as said, influencing so many difficulties or the many decisions afterwards. So the first recommendation would be, and I mean, it sounds so self-evident, but it's, as already said, quite often not the case. Develop a clear research question and make an extensive research of literature. Because when you do this extensive research of literature, you sometimes find out that it's not very nice, but it's better you find it out on your own, that somebody has already answered your question. I mean, then you don't need to do this study. Of course, it is a pity, but I mean, then it is like that. Because if you submit a paper to a journal, somebody may know that this question was already answered. So, and then you receive this feedback, and that is far too late. So, or you will already find out with an extensive research of literature that you cannot answer this question because the answers already provided by the literature are really contradictory. Then you need to decide whether you really want to continue with this kind of question. So that is something which is very important, and that's the reason why I say it at the beginning. It's not only done as a problem or by beginners. Many experienced researchers do that as well. And you sometimes say, look, that can't be true that such a famous person is doing such an awful mistake. But it happens. So, yes, of course. So, I mean, that's the reason why I'm now sitting down. I think that should be because I have prepared a few questions for you afterwards. So we should do that in a much more discursive way. Yes. Please go ahead.
How can we become sure that our questions, our research question has been answered by a previous research? There is not a one data set that we can find the research related to our research topic. So when I'm doing my homework literature review, our teachers give lots of homeworks related to find a topic and look at the research. But I'm always not sure that how am I covered all the topics, all the research, and at the end of my paper, I will say yes. One researcher says this, and with that, but there is a lack of research in that topic. I couldn't say that. How I can say that?
Actually, I mean, there is no right way of doing it, but there is one database which is quite strong. That is, there is this Karlsruhe database, which originally was connected to ZDM, so you can go to that database. And I mean, that is the reason why these index services are nowadays so important, because and you really need to be sure that your classification of your paper is afterwards really done correctly, because you have keywords and you enter the search with keywords, for example, within your journal or within Google Scholar. I mean, Google Scholar is nowadays, it's not definitely the only way how to search literature, but as a start, Google Scholar is definitely a very powerful method. And if you have, and you will find with Google Scholar, you will find the keywords with which you have classified your own paper. So that means you should first of all look for handbook chapters. A handbook chapter should, or it's must, I mean, there are poor handbook chapters around, but it shouldn't be. So a good handbook chapter should provide you with the main literature. So, and then you go to this main literature. That means you're doing a search back. So you have your research question roughly. You look for handbook chapters, and there are not so many handbooks around. There is now this new Springer Encyclopedia around, which, I mean, you have here at the university, and there you can do a very powerful electronic search. There you will find a lot of, and they have a lot of references after each keyword. So there you can find a lot of references already, and then you search for the references in the handbook chapter, and then you see what kind of references they are quoting. So actually, you should start quite broadly with handbook chapters, and in addition, Google Scholar, and then really try to find out and look, of course, look through journals, but actually, I mean, with the handbook chapters and the references over there, go back. So, and of course, I mean, I would always say your supervisor should know the relevant literature. That would be my requirement for a good PhD supervisor. It's the reason why I do not accept anybody who's not working in my field of expertise, because then I do not know whether something is missing. How should I, if it's not my area of expertise? So, I mean, that is actually, and then of course, I mean, there are actually not so many journals around. So if you look, let's say, the last 10 years of education studies and math education, then GRME, Journal of Research in Math Education. When it comes to teacher education, it's a Journal of Mathematics Teacher Education. Then you have ZDM, and in ZDM you only need to look for an issue which is related to your theme. You don't need to look at all the other issues. Then you have the International Journal of Science and Math Education. Two or three more international journals are around. I mean, that's it. We do not have so many journals. In Merge Journal is now coming up. Mathematical Enthusiast. I mean, Cognition and Behavior. Yes, but I mean, even then, preschool is then even more complicated. It's on the one hand a bit more complicated because you do not have the safe. But I mean, there are not so many journals around concerning preschool. And I mean, in the handbook chapters, you will find something about preschool. So I mean, I would always start with the handbook. And I mean, pre-education is something which is nowadays prominently described. And I mean, there are not many researchers around when it comes to preschool and early childhood. I would say 10 when it comes to math education, 10 researchers, and would even know them by heart. So, I mean, that is not so complicated. It's quite a small group. I mean, but of course, I mean, your supervisor should know. I mean, that is, and if your supervisor cannot help you with this important question, you have two possibilities. Change your research question or your supervisor. And better do it at the beginning. Sorry, I mean...
That's true.
Yes, I mean... yes, sometimes it's better to do, be quick at the beginning, because if you realize that something, oh, maybe, but I don't have time, and make a decision. of course, being diplomatic. So, I mean, the handbook chapters, and I mean, there is one handbook by Springer now around, or in the 3rd edition. And what is important from my point of view, you should not only look for the newest version of the handbooks. For example, the Springer handbook. The first version was, from my point of view, the best one. The second one was not as good as the first one, and the third one, from my point of view, has significant weaknesses. When I look at the modeling chapter, I would think that it's very, very poor. So, I mean, I quite often, for example, there is a new NCDM handbook coming around. And when I looked at the overview about the models for the professional knowledge concerning teacher education, I went back to the old handbook edited by Krauss in 1986 or something like that. So you go back to the old handbooks. Do not only go to the most recent ones. Okay. So, but whenever you have a question or a comment, we simply should do that in a more discursive way. So another thing which is a common problem of beginners and experienced researchers, the methodological part is very insufficient. And that means already the study is done in an insufficient way, or at least the paper is not describing that very clearly. And that I can say of 50% of all papers have a remark when I send out the first decision that are saying, your methodological part is far too short. It's not clear how you have evaluated the data, and especially how you have to develop your results. I mean, that is such a typical. You say something like, I use grounded theory. I mean, what does that mean? I have used grounded theory. Did you use a coding book? Yes, which kind of coding book? Give at least an example of a code. So, I mean, people tend to use simply qualitative content analysis or text analysis. Yes, what does that mean? Give an example. Otherwise, I mean, each journal which has rigorous methodological standards will really ask you for an extensive part over here. And you really must have, at least in the appendix, given example how you have evaluated the data. And of course, I mean, especially if you have a very small sample, you should describe here the potential how to generalize. I mean, we have quite often studies where you have a classroom with 17 students and one teacher. Actually, I'm a little bit fed up with these kinds of studies because it's very interesting, but what does it tell me about other studies, about other students? So is that a typical score? Is it a non-typical? Because from non-typical cases, we can learn a lot. So, I mean, that is something which is, from my point of view, very important. And something, the next one, that is something which happens especially with very, very famous and experienced researchers. You have a very, 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 very ambitious study, a theoretical frame, and the results of your study are very small. I mean, that is something where you think, okay, can it be a little bit less ambitious? I mean, that really needs to be adequate. If I have very local results, I should not come up with a huge global theory. And something which I already mentioned in the talks before, there is no interpretation of the results. You are simply have lost energy and power after you have written up your results, but then you have no energy in order to interpret them once more. But that is something which, of course, and then it's sometimes quite helpful if you have the time, simply take the paper away, or when you're writing a thesis, put this part away, write other parts, then go back after a few days or weeks, sometimes even after months, and say, okay, let's say whether I'm now an outsider. If you go back to your own thesis after several months, you are an outsider. And suddenly you have the idea, yes, that's how I can interpret it. Or you realize that there are breaks in it, so are within your interpretations. So interpretation of the results very important. And even if somebody else comes to different results, but it's still important to give a try. So, of course, the main scientific standards are obvious in each research study, and the papers in which you present your research study, they have to be based on scientific research. And you need to show that you are, yes, acquainted with these scientific standards. And that means you should not give anecdotal evidence. And I can tell you that just the paper have just been close to accept it by a very famous editor of a very famous journal. And the paper really was very nicely written and very convincing. Unfortunately, it was only anecdotal evidence. So it means there were no arguments given why this results were true. It was a description about a very nice case studies, and then very far-reaching conclusions were done on the basis of a very vague a very vague database and a very shallow data evaluation. So what people quite often do, and you realize it immediately when you look at the methodological part, they simply have transcripts. And they look through the interviews, take a text marker and mark the important aspect, and then they say these are the results. I mean, that is not doing in a controlled way. I mean, you need a coding book, you need to evaluate what kind of a text you are marking, and many studies are really done in such a way. So, and of course, if you are publishing, if you have a discussion or a commentary paper, I mean, that is something you are usually invited for, something like that at a more mature stage in your academic career. Then it can be more controversial. I mean, in a commentary paper, you can really say, look, I want to describe differences within the discussion, really antagonism within the discussions, and then you maybe within the noticing framework, the contrast between the noticing approach by Mason and the noticing approach, let's say, by Shireen. And then you can be quite provocative, but that's only in a commentary or discussion paper, and that is something which you are usually invited for, something like that, and that it's really usually taking place in a more advanced status of your career. So maybe we only do it in 5 minutes because we are running a little bit out of time. But I really would like to ask you, first of all, that you think on your own, let's say 3 minutes. Why do you think that scientific standards are important? I mean, I've told you that, but it's my position. So maybe you have another one. So what do you think? Why are scientific standards important? And then let's say have 5 minutes discussion within your group. So you have a partner or go to 3. So what do you think? Why are scientific standards important? 2 minutes, think on your own, and then 5 minutes discussion. Okay, I will tell you when the 2 minutes are over. First, so 2 minutes, think on your own. So, okay, now joint discussion. 5 minutes. Okay, so then I think we should stop. We have more discussion opportunities around. So what did you find out? So what do you think? Why are scientific standards important? We had an intensive discussion, yes?
We thought that scientific standards provide objectivity for the
Mhm.
anyone who based on scientific standards can evaluate a study.
Mm-hmm.
So they provide objectivity.
Okay. Or is that the same you had raised your hand?
I would say something more. In order to in order to replicate various research, researchers should explain in a framework scientific based on the scientific standards.
Mm-hmm.
And also opinions should come in the discussion part. So scientific standards is important in the explaining the results.
Okay. Somebody else?
Mine kind of same, but I want to read this. Scientific standards are important to create a common layout, to make consensus throughout the academic world, for every reader to understand and evaluate the same thing about the study.
So, I mean, that is actually focusing on very on the same core, namely what you said, objectivity, or I mean that we can replicate something. I mean, if we do not know whether somebody has done a study, I mean, we can come to totally different results, and we can't compare that. So, I mean, that it has to do with the scientific standards of reliability and validity, and of course, I mean, really want to find out whether we can trust you, what you have found out. Okay. So the scientific standards, yes, which you need then afterwards to follow in your paper or in your studies. I mean, you first have to find out, I mean, that is, let's go back. I mean, that is something which I think is consensus within academia all over the world, that we really have to have rigorous scientific standards. Although I think when I look at psychology, and I have papers coming in from psychological departments, their standards are sometimes more narrow, but more rigorous. So it has to do where you come from, what kind of standards you are following. But I mean, these reasons why we think that standards are important, I mean, I think that it's really universal. So now when it comes to, yes, the structure of a study or a paper, I mean, the introduction, we only need, of course, only for a paper, not when you set up the study. But as already said, the clear research question, the state of the art, we discussed already about that. Then your theoretical framework and the conceptualizations or constructs. That is something which has become very, very important in the last few years. And that is very difficult. It's very easy when it comes to quantitative studies, because you have to develop your hypothesis in advance, then you have to test them. But what do you do with a qualitative study where you don't have your hypothesis which you can test, where you sometimes evaluate even your questions out of the data, and sometimes you even modify your question. So I mean, that is easier to write than really to achieve it. And I mean, if you look at the large-scale studies, they have all modified their theoretical framework while they are carrying out the study. We did not start with a PID model at the very beginning. That really emerged while we were carrying out the study. And it's simply not true, even with a quantitative study, that everything is done at the beginning and then you start. It is, I mean, we should try to do that, but requirements emerge while you are doing your research. Methodology already said how important it is, the results and the interpretations. And then, of course, I mean, something like the limitations of the study, the conclusions, and the prospects, or looking ahead. So, I mean, that is something where you have to answer the what question. Yes, you have to start a very nice study, but what can we learn out of that? That needs to be definitely described. So these kind of more underlying these scientific standards need to be asked. So I had asked you to read this paper by De Pape and De Korte and Verschaffel, and we don't need to go into detail with the paper, but I would, and I think we shorten that, let's say for 10 minutes, that you try to find out the structure of the paper according to this list. Namely, did they have a proper introduction, a proper research question? Did they describe the state of the art? What about the theoretical framework, methodology, results? Did they give interpretations? So try to analyze the structure of the paper shortly, not, and I've already said, you don't need to read the whole paper because you can easily see it at the, I would say, the first 3 pages. And then maybe you look shortly, quickly at the end. So 10 minutes. And you should work in groups. So, as long as I don't sign that I'm ordering something. Then we say we are ordering the next washing machine.
Yes, you're ordering the next washing machine.
Evet, kaç tane bir başka temelde yazmış. Öğretmen evet.
what he was supposed to do. And there were not a lot of metacognitive activities coming up within the classrooms. So the question is, did Pape and others, were they able to explain that in detail? Why they didn't have positive results? I mean, describing that you have achieved results which are not convincing is something which is difficult. So if you simply have a look at their discussion parts, is that convincing for you? Do you think that they give good explanations why there are no positive results of the study? I mean, it's an example where somebody really reports, look, we could not identify many metacognitive activities in Flemish classrooms, although we have it in the curriculum. Yes. And why there is a difference between the two teachers? So have a look at the discussion part and see whether it is convincing for you. Okay, I think we can stop now. And what did you find in this discussion part? Yes, about the fact that the students did not have, or that in the test of the students after this kind of intervention, people and others have done, did not really have a big effect. That means the students didn't do the problem solving, the word solving, the problem solving of these word problems better than they did before. What kind of justifications did they give, and did you think it was convincing?
They build their arguments based on evidences from the literature and the present study. For example, they claim that teachers' beliefs about metacognitive and heuristic skills affect their how to construct problem-solving lessons, and they explain these claims based on their present study, their findings, and the literature, previous literature, to convince audience.
The readership.
Yes.
So I want to add something. At the last part of the fourth paragraph, it's saying that it's making evidence-based explanations regarding with the teachers' interviews. So it's a clear evidence for convincing me actually, and it's giving examples, actually concrete examples of it.
Of it, that means why the results could not be observed.
Yes, yes. It's because it's discussing about the usefulness and uselessness of the approaches, and it's giving evidence with examples.
Thank you very much. What else could you add? Yes.
Their main focus is the teaching style of in the classroom, not students, and they are looking for the indirect effect through the teachers' teaching strategy on students' performance. And their main aim, of course, their main aim might be the ultimate aim might be the performance, student performance, but mainly so how they effectively use these kind of strategies in their activities, problems, and activities. This I can do results of convincing.
So the explanations was convincing. I mean, they pay really one page to the explanation, and they really give a lot of and you have already really said that it's they relate their explanations why no results or needing no results could be observed to the literature. I mean, that is very good. It's quite very clear, and they really go back to the teaching style of the teacher and say, look, at the very end of the day, where do they say it is that there are 2 teachers and something about 40 students, and of course, I mean, and they said, first, the small sample involving only 2 teachers and 43 student members, finding significant differences between both classrooms and jeopardizes the generalizability of our conclusion, and asked for more research with larger sample. I mean, if you are at this stage, then you can lean back and say, look, my research career is secure. Because then, I mean, it's obvious, although you have not find interest, or let's say, the results you wanted to have, we know what you could do afterwards. And I think it's quite obvious if you have only 2 teachers. I mean, it's about teaching style. An intervention with only 2 teachers is really quite brave. And I mean, if I would have been the person who had to assign the money, I would say, come on, can't you have it a little bit smaller, and then this, I mean, maybe shorter in time,
but then with more teachers. I mean, of course, if you all have a shorter time, then you have no long effect. I mean, that is always the problem. Have a longer study with maybe only a few teachers, a few students, but then you rely so strongly on these different persons, or do it in a broader way, and then of course if it's shorter, then you can say, look, the promotion of problem solving skills and abilities needs a longer time. So I mean, that is really a very difficult and delicate balance which you have to find. So I personally find that a very interesting example. That's the reason why I selected that for you, where people, I mean, very famous researchers. I mean, Verschaffel is one of the most famous psychologists in our area. So, I mean, really famous, and the culture is very famous in the group, European Association for Learning and Instruction. So it's a very, very famous researcher who said, look, we couldn't do better, but we can give explanations why we didn't achieve better results. And I mean, that is quite rare that somebody said, look, it was not what we had expected, but they publish it. And I mean, then you can learn from it and say, look, there is either this big difference between what the curriculum says and what's really going on in the classroom. I mean, we know that. We have wonderful curricula all over the world, and what's going on in the classrooms, quite different. So, I mean, they showed that, and that is, from my point, a very interesting approach. And I now understand a few weaknesses. Once more, whenever I read the paper, I see weaknesses, but I see a very strong strengths in this over here, that they really were brave enough to discuss that. Okay, so now I would like to come to the question how to publish a paper. And that's sometimes quite time-consuming process. I mentioned something about 1 year. I mean, sometimes it even takes you longer. Should be described now. And yes, how do we publish a paper, or what is going on? First of all, I mean, each high standard journal has a peer review process. So even nowadays, you have even proceedings which have a peer review process, or if you, for example, apply, let's say, for early and you want to present a poster or a paper, then you have to go through a peer review process. But this peer review process is definitely shorter and much milder than one which you have, let's say, for example, with ZDM. So, and I would strongly recommend you, I mean, there's a hot debate going on, but I would not recommend to go for a high standard journal at the beginning. For example, if you look at education studies in mathematics, you can do it as a young researcher. I would not recommend it. I would try to get one of the second class journals and try to get in over there, and not already look for really the flagships. Or learning and instruction, an unbelievable high-ranking journals with very high methodological standards. I would not do that, but I would really say, look, let's start with a journal which has less rigorous standards. So the review criteria are, I mean, the criteria we have discussed in the last few minutes. Is the paper a meaningful contribution to mathematics education research? Does it say anything? I mean, that is a very important question. Is the approach or the argumentation original? And does the paper develop new insight into relevant research questions on mathematics education? I mean, that is not obvious that you are contributing to something new. I mean, you can really research a very interesting question, but is it contributing to math education? I mean, that happens. So, for example, if you are replicating the, let's say, 100th study on the experiment of Piaget. I mean, everybody would say, come on, Piaget, that is very outdated. And unless you have a very good reason why you go back to Piaget, you would not replicate that. So it must be really original and provide new insight. Then does the paper review previous studies and does it consider the relevant literature? That refers to the state of the art discussion. Does it really refer to what is already going on? And that, of course, is what I've already mentioned. Sometimes the state of the art description refers to outdated literature. Literature only referring to their own country and their own culture. That is simply not acceptable. So then the next aspects are, is the theoretical framework adequate? Is there appropriate alignment between the theoretical framework and the questions asked or the problems tackled? But I mentioned you can have a very ambitious theoretical framework, but then the questions you are asking are very basic. You can see with this paper by Gabriele and others, they have a very nice local framework. It's not too ambitious. They actually really restrict themselves to what we know about metacognition and solving word problems. Nothing more, no other big theories. It's really this very easy, this very well-defined field. Yes, is the methodological approach adequate? Do the research methods and analysis match the problem or the question? I mean, that is not always the case. If you have a very small database, then you should not go for quantitative methods. I mean, there are, when you have a quantitative study, there are strict rules of thumb. What is the minimum number of cases you need to have? But for qualitative studies, I mean, there are some kind of rules as well. And if you have a very rough text analysis, then you should have at least 5 to 10 single cases or something like that. And not only one teacher, like they had here, 2 teachers, 40 students, quite shaky. Yes, are the argumentations consistent? Are the claims and conclusions justified in an acceptable way? Here you see all the scientific standards you discussed and which you emphasized on your own. They are all in there. Are the claims and conclusions justified in an acceptable way? Do they follow logically from the data, or are there information presented? I mean, it is quite often the case that you have very interesting interpretations, but they have nothing to do with the data you have just presented. I mean, it sounds very trivial, but it's not trivial when you start to write. And you really have to say when you write, whenever I make a claim, can I give a reference for it? And when you start as a newcomer to write a paper, you really should put a reference after a claim. I mean, afterwards you are getting a little bit more relaxed, but actually it is a must that you can really justify all the claims by previous research, and hopefully not only by your own previous research. It's what more mature research is doing. They always refer to their own work, and then, I mean, they have started with this very strong assumption and a small database and very strong claims, and at the end of the day, they're always quoting themselves, and then they say, look, it's like that, they have proof that, and then they quote it and quote it and quote it. It's not meant, it's really that you should look for really evidence for your claims. The quality of the presentation, I mean, that is something which is very, very important. The suitable title. And I mean, they here, Gabriele and others, they have a quite long title. It's very dry for studying. I mean, teachers' metacognitive immersive approaches to word problem solving, analysis and impact on student beliefs and performance. But it's very clear. I mean, we know very easily what they have done. They have promoted the metacognitive and heuristic approaches to word problem by teachers, and they have looked what kind of impact that had on students. So already from reading the title, you know what they are doing. It's now becoming more and more popular, and I'm not very happy about that, that you have a student quote in the title. Let's do it. Analysis on argumentation and proof process in a second grade classroom. I mean, that's something like, or I can't see it. It's quite often. If you explain it to me, I understand it. I mean, what does it tell to me when I have the students quote? I mean, of course, interesting students quotes are very nice, maybe even within an abstract, but in the title. So whenever I have a chance, I try to convince the author to have a nice title, but you do not need to look for something which is really, how do you say, something which is catching the interest. It should be concise and precise. And the abstract is the most important part. And I mean, you went and looked to the abstract and said, look, research questions missing. Yes. I mean, although I nowadays read, before I accept the paper, I read the abstract several times. Even getting more and more precise when it comes to the keywords and the abstract and the title. Because the abstracts, they are displayed in, and there are abstract indexing services. So, and in this abstract indexing services, you only have the abstract and the title, of course, the authors and the keywords. And if the abstract is not interesting enough, people will not read your paper. Why should they? Or if you look at Springer, you can always, or other Elsevier, they only display the abstract. You can always read the abstract for free. University doesn't have a journal. And when would you do it if you have the impression that it's interesting? So really polish your abstract. That is something which is very, very important. And it's, yes, I mean, I could always say that. It's clear, yes, violated most of the time. Is the writing lucid, clear, and well organized? I mean, that is usually much more important for people, or if you write in your mother tongue. I mean, if you are fighting with English, I would not go for the first paper for an English journal. And I would say, look, okay, first do it in your own language, and then the second paper could be a paper in an international journal. It's simply more complicated to write in another language. And then it's not very organized, it's not clear, and it's by no way lucid. So is the quality of the figures and tables adequate? I mean, sometimes you have restrictions of pages. We work with restrictions on characters. I mean, ZTM, so, but if you work on restrictions of pages, then you even try to decrease the size of the figures and tables until it's really not readable anymore. That you should really prevent. I think it's not what you should do. Avoid, sorry. Yes, you have submitted your paper. It is usually reviewed. Either it is you have double-blind, International Journal of Science and Education, ESN, TRME. They work with double-blind. ZTM and many others work with single-blind. That means you submit your paper. It's obvious to the reviewers who they are reviewing, and then you receive the feedback. You do not know who has reviewed you. So that is a strong distinction, single and double-blind. I mean, the reason why we do not work with double-blind is we invite people who know who we have invited. Why should I work with double-blind? And on the other hand, if you have big research projects, you really cannot avoid who is writing this paper. I mean, about text follow-up data, there are 5 to 7 people that can write and have this data. I mean, what should we say then? Say who are the authors? You can discuss about the order of the authors, but that's it. So it's sometimes very strange. You should try to avoid that the reviewers find out who the authors are. It's not sometimes simply not possible. So after 2 to 3 months, it depends really on the journal. It's at the end, usually at the latest after 3 months, you receive a recommendation by the reviewers. And the recommendation is accept without changes. That happens, let's say, in 5% of the cases, or even less. I mean, usually you always have to criticize something. Yeah, so accept without changes could be possible, and after several revisions, you should be at this stage. Then accept with minor changes. I mean, if accept with minor changes, that is always very, very nice. It means, you know, you are accepted, you can be already quoted, and there are only a few minor changes you have to do. When it comes to accept with significant changes, it's still nice because it is accepted, but you know, it's hard work coming up, something about 2 weeks. And that is something which is really complicated because authors, when they receive a decision accept with significant changes, they think they can do some surface polishing. Okay, 1 weekend. Simply bear in mind that nearly the same amount of money you have, of time you have used in order to write the paper is needed afterwards to revise the paper. So if you have written 2 weeks on your paper, that is something like a minimal time, sometimes even longer, then you should have 2 weeks in order to revise it. At least when you receive something like accept with significant changes. And if you rewrite, then that means it doesn't tell you that you have a chance to come in. Rewrite means not start from the very scratch, but really have to do a lot. That means it may even be that you have to work harder than you did with your first attempt. And then, of course, sometimes you have to reject. I mean, if you receive reject, you can still polish your paper and then submit to another journal. But, I mean, if you have received reject, then you have to read at the arguments of the reviewers and really find out whether there is a chance to rewrite the paper. But this decision is very, very hard. So, usually, I mean, these are the decision criteria which are given by the reviewers, and they are sometimes maybe differently, but more or less these are the categories. So, and then you receive a decision letter as an author, and this decision is mainly is done by either the editor-in-chief, based on the reviews, or by the guest editors, or by some kind of associate editors. In any case, the editor-in-chief or somebody else functioning as editor is writing this letter to you. And of course, this letter doesn't mean it is written on a sheet of paper. We usually will receive that as an email, because now all big journals work with some kind of editorial management system. It means you have an account, you upload your paper as a reviewer, you review your paper within the editorial manager, and then you receive out of the editorial manager, you receive this email. So, but it's still a letter written to you. And of course, the decision letter includes the decision. And then a summary of the necessary changes in the reviews. And I can, as really now working as an editor for more than 10 years, I can only say the following. Simply look very, very strongly for the summary of the necessary changes made by the editor-in-chief. That's what he or she, at the end of the day, will look for. She will look, or he will look, whether the changes important for him or her are really done. That is the most important aspect. And if you have pleased one of the reviewers, but not met the requirements given at the beginning of the letter, then you will not succeed in this journey. And that is really sometimes surprising that, you know, authors, while revising the paper, add sometimes details over details over details because the reviewers have asked for that. And at the end of the day, you have no idea what the argumentation flow is. I mean, you have to see that really the summary of necessary changes and nearly all decisions that I've ever seen contain this summary. And that is the important point to me. Then you receive the reviews. Usually there are full reviews of all the reviews. Sometimes it's only parts of it, but most of the time it's all reviews. Because as editor-in-chief or someone who's making the decision, you can work on the reviewers' comments. So I mean, sometimes the reviewers' comments are very brief, and when they are very brief, I simply delete them. It means I don't want anybody who has to read this comment like I do not see any sense in this paper. I mean, that is not a scientific comment, so I will read that and say, look, that is nothing you should write to any author. So it is either the reviews as they were written or some kind of, let's say, a summary. Then, and that is quite often the case that the reviews are contradictory. I have it quite often that I have with one paper, I have something that I've ever read. Wonderful. Next paper, reviewer said, okay, not too bad, but major revisions are necessary. And the last one said, it's the poorest paper I ever read in my life, and you have to reject it. I mean, if you have then this kind of decision to say, or recommendations, what shall we do? And then, as already said, the editor-in-chief or the guest editor makes a decision, and that decision is important for him. And he or she will emphasize in the letter to you what is important. And sometimes you have a comment like, I do not share fully the comments of reviewer 2, but take them as a kind of recommendations what you could do, but you do not must follow the recommendations of reviewer 2. So there is some kind of commenting the reviews, and you should read very carefully between the lines of what is said. So, I mean, I have read, because I'm submitting papers, of course, to other journals in my own journal as well, and I know how to read these kinds of decision letters. Yes, take reviewers' comments seriously as a help and as a measure for improvement and not as a punishment. I mean, when you receive these letters, I mean, your mood is spoiled for at least one day, maybe 3 weeks. I mean, because you have worked so hard for such a paper, you are so enthusiastic about the paper, and you are so sure it was the best thing you have ever done. And then somebody comes and says, yes, quite nice, but needs significant changes. It's nothing which is very nice, at least for the first day and even for the second. But I mean, I receive very often comments telling me by the authors, look, it was a hard process, but now the paper is really much improved. So usually, I mean, with the help of this review process of paper reviews, because you receive an outsider perspective, you realize what's missing. So it's not a punishment, it's really a measure for improvement. Although, I mean, when I receive such a letter saying, you have to do that and that and that and that, I'm not very happy at all. I mean, who would be happy? So that is very important. And really, you should develop a constructive attitudes towards the reviews. And because many of you are master PhD students, ask your supervisor for support. That is very important, that you do not only read the decision on your own, really ask your supervisor, because your supervisor should be somebody who is experienced and you can read between the lines. So what is important? I can remember that one of the first papers I have written, I wrote with my PhD supervisor, and he had a long list of changes necessary. And then he really looked through and said, look, that can be done, can't be done, you have to justify why you can't do that. our sample is not able doesn't allow us this kind of interpretation. Okay, that can be done, this can't be done, and so on and so on. So we really need somebody who's interpreting this decision letter. Not all aspects can be done in revision. It's not the case that you must do everything which reviewers want, or what even the editor-in-chief wants. It's nowadays the case that you have, it's asked that you write a letter to the editor-in-chief and a letter and to the reviewers, where you have a two-side column. Left-hand side is the comments by the editor-in-chief, and by the reviewers. On the right-hand side, you have the arguments. You say, I have done the following thing in order to meet this argument. I have done the following thing in order to meet the arguments. I have done the following thing in order to meet the arguments. Our sample does not allow this kind of conclusions you want us to make. Therefore, we did not include it, but we included a footnote explaining that. So it is not the case that you must do everything, but you must justify it. And it's, I mean, this way of, or this letter to the editor-in-chief has been established, I would say, the last 3 to 4 years. And we should really take it seriously because it's the first thing I personally read. And it can be sure that this is the first thing the reviewers, when they are re-reviewing your paper, read it. So really answer very clearly what you have done and what you haven't done. And really small changes on the surface that you recognize that doesn't help you. So the second revision is usual. So that means you have revised your paper, it's going into a second review, and even then a second revision is usual, especially when you have major revisions. So it means you should not expect at least one revision you are coming through. 2 revisions are not unusual, and they sometimes even 5 revisions. I mean, that is, yes, have to be patient. And I always apologize if I ask once more for changes, but I ask for them. So, yes, what I've already said, write a letter in which you explain what you have changed. And, of course, if clear changes are recognizable, the review process will be at the end likely positive. But, I mean, if you only do surface changes, it can be that after the first revision you receive a final rejection, although you had accept with major revision. Because accept with major revision doesn't mean that you are accepted in each case. It's only a tendency. Yes, if you are doing the major revisions we are asking you for, then we will accept your paper. And if you don't do it, then we will reject it. So it's really very important to take this reviewers' comments seriously and really work along these reviewers' comments. So my main recommendation is for young researchers: ask your supervisor for support, publish jointly, especially at the beginning, of course, only if it's adequate. I mean, that is your own decision, and it has to do with the question whether we can work together. But I definitely would really strongly recommend that. I have a lot of publications with my PhD supervisor, and I have now a lot of publications with my PhD students. They learn a lot while working with me because it means they receive already a lot of feedback when they are publishing a paper with me. So I mean, that is really something which I strongly recommend. So, work for the evening. I know that you are already very tired and the weather has become a little bit better. But because I already announced that tomorrow I would like to discuss with you about the 13, the International Congress on Mathematical Education, which will take place next year in Germany. I hope a few of you will consider participating in IGNI 13. So what I ask you to do is develop a first sketch for a paper either on your master or PhD thesis, which she could present at IGNI 13, or which she could, if you say, look, I can't do it, that is too far away, or I don't receive the money, or whatever. Then you could say, look, I'm going to submit it to a journal. So, first sketch, let's say, 1 page. You don't need to write it down in full, but only a sketch where you really think about the scientific criteria for papers, which you have now discussed quite lengthy. And you should think already about literature base. I guess you all have your laptop with you, you all have access to internet, so you can already do some kind of search and see, look, what could be important literature base. And these ideas will be discussed tomorrow at the session on IGNI 13. And if you think, look, I'm looking for a journal, the review process of taking place at IGNI 13 very similar to what is going on in a journal. I mean, less rigorous, but so I mean that still holds when you say that I don't want to participate in IGNI 13. It still will hold for everything concerning a paper which you are going to submit. So that is the work for the evening. I hope it's not too lengthy, but I think you still have enough time for that. So these are the scientific criteria for academic papers, which you definitely should follow. I mean, you will receive the presentation, but bear in mind, action, research question, state of the art on research question, theoretical framework could be combined if you are brave enough. Methodology, results, interpretation. I mean, the limitations of the study conclusions can be a bit shorter because it's sketch. But definitely these parts should be there. And I mean, if you think about the state of the art, then you definitely have to, you can write something about the database or literature base you would like to follow. So that is the homework for this evening. I hope it will not take you too long time, but I thank you very much for your attention, and if you wish, you can have some more time for discussions. Yes, are there any questions or remarks?
Can you explain a little bit more about the state of the art? State of the art on research question. Maybe we don't know the term exactly.
Yes, I mean, it's at least a very European term. It means that you describe what we already know about research questions. You hear about the metacognitive and heuristic approaches to word problem solving. Then it is meant everything we already know. So that is meant the state of the art. What do we already know? Because we don't need to replicate something. And of course, we only want to do a study which relates already to other studies. I mean, of course, you can have a brilliant idea. But I mean, usually you would try to connect your ideas with others. So the state of the art or what is going on in research is meant by that. Actually, what we are going to plan for IGNI 13, and I will describe that in more detail tomorrow, we have a lot of groups working during IGNI 13, and most of the groups will describe, yes, the knowledge which is known or what is achieved so far within 40 pages. And we will publish these small booklets open access, so that each topic study group, let's say on calculus teaching, higher education, problem solving, modeling, gender, they already know what kind of results are already known and what kind of results we can rely on. I mean, it is difficult to achieve, but yes. Further questions or comments? you already make these bad experiences with publications, or? Yes? And
experience.
Yes.
I sent the paper for a journal, not a journal, for a junior researcher hour. There's a session for the junior researcher hour, and I sent a full paper for that. One of the reviewers tried that this paper has some theoretical, methodological, analytical problems. I said, okay, I understand what's tickling it. That was this very expensive, but it's the paper was written so quick, so we know that's.
Look, sometimes the problem is that, especially when it comes to conferences, you have only 4 or 8 pages, and afterwards you hear, look, you didn't explain that, you didn't explain the methodology, you didn't explain the results in detail, and you didn't interpret them. Yes, true, but how can I do that in 4 pages? I mean, that is something where you say, oh, come on, that is not very nice. And for example, when it comes to PME, I mean, you all know PME, Psychology and Math Education. A couple of years ago, it was, I think 4 years ago, it was run by the Ubus in Ankara. And I mean, this PME is, you submit a paper, a research report, and you only have 8 pages space. And I can tell you that I don't know anybody who has not been rejected so far. It's even something like a quality standard that you have been rejected at least once. So even the presidents of PME have been rejected with their papers. So, I mean, it has to do with the fact they have 3 reviewers, whether you think that, for example, emphasize the clearness of the research question. Even with this paper, you could say, look, research question not clearly spelled out, not as clearly as I would wish. And then no convincing results, that. Or you could say, look, it's very interesting, they discussed why they didn't receive any results. So, I mean, it's simply a question of norms. So that is really the problem. And I mean, we should not say that these reviews are objective. I would never, ever say that. These reviews are based on own norms. And I mean, if I would wish I could kill each paper, I simply select reviewers who come from a very different paradigm. They say, look, what kind of things these people have written, I can't accept that. So because if you have already people coming from a very, so if you, for example, have a qualitatively oriented, fine-grained study, and you select 3 quantitatively oriented researchers, this paper will never ever come through. So, I mean, that is this kind of processes which make it so difficult to run a journal successfully. I mean, it's not objective, and you should not think that your paper is, I mean, you should accept the reviewer's comments. That, I mean, that was my central message. Really think that the reviewers want to improve your paper. But on the other hand, there are strong norms underlying the votes of the reviewers. And hopefully you have a strong editor-in-chief who's balancing that. But if you do not have a strong editor-in-chief who simply allow the reviewers to follow their own thinking, then you are bad off. So, I mean, that is something where your supervisor maybe knows the policy of this journal and say, look, and that is something which I really strongly recommend when it comes to conferences as well as to journalists. Look very clearly at their goals. What kind of goals do they achieve? And if your paper doesn't fit, simply do not submit it or do not go to this conference. I mean, when it comes to math education or general education, I mean, we have the early group and we have the ESA group. ESA is qualitatively oriented and early is qualitatively oriented. So if you have a qualitatively oriented study, you may experience many difficulties when you go to early. You might be better off if you go to easy. So I mean, that is something where we really need to be very choosy where to submit the paper, either for a conference or a journal. And of course, I mean, if you are a newcomer, you may not know that. So I think that's where you need your supervisor. Yes, but I mean, we all have gone through this process. I mean, that is, we are always going through this process. I mean, that is something which, I mean, you should simply say, look, yes, that's the way it is, but at the end of the day, the paper is better. I mean, that is really my strong message. The papers are improving. There are simply so many things you don't see while you're writing. So you only really need to make sure that your paper is good enough to get the first hurdle. It means that you have a chance to submit. If you fail this first hurdle, then you are lost for this journal. So I mean, do not submit, how would you say, a paper which is not mature enough. I would never ever do that, because if the paper is rejected, you are done for this journal. So I mean, really, if you are under time pressure, simply give yourself 2 more months or something like that. Never ever do something like that on a time pressure. Of course, with conferences, we have the time pressure.
As an editor-in-chief, how do you manage all those articles, like 2 reviewers, 3 reviewers reviewing an article, and you need to look over many articles that are coming, and like not just only the article itself, but the reviewers' comments. And
I mean, I had once discussed with Peter Liljedahl, who is a associate editor for the International Journal of Science and Mass Education, and he said, or he confirmed what I said, that you know very clearly where possibilities for weaknesses are, and you concentrate on that. You really, I mean, I do first of all a very quick screening, and then I go into detail. And I mean, and the methodology part is usually already look, that is not strong enough. Theoretical framework, not strong enough. So I mean, at the first go, I really look at these usual weaknesses, and then I go into more detail. And of course, I rely on good reviews, because I mean, my problem is that we are editing a lot of different or we are publishing papers in a lot of different themes. Issue 2, I didn't bring that with me, is on activism. I mean, I'm not an expert in activism in math education. So I really had to rely on my guest editors and what kind of recommendation they were giving, and then we had phone calls and Skype conferences where I said, look, what do you think? I mean, if it's about problem solving, modeling, higher education, teacher education, I mean, I'm very familiar with that. Professional development, okay, I know literature and I can really touch on my own, but activism, that was hard. So, I mean, I rely on good reviews. So we work very hard in order to get good reviews. And reviewers who really didn't provide us with good reviews, maybe very short or very harsh, we would not invite another time. So we have our blacklist. Yeah, I mean, there are simply people always criticize each paper everything, and that is not very helpful. So I mean, it is a complicated balance. Yes. I mean, on the long run, I think that ZDM needs to change the policy. That means we need more associate editors who are taking over more responsibilities. I mean, that is what needs to be done on the long run. And I mean, as far as I know, at the ESN, they have 1 editor-in-chief and 2 or 3 associate editors. So I mean, that's at International Journal of Science and Math Education is doing the same. I mean, that is one reason why nowadays many journals invite guest editors and then have special issues, because then, I mean, then they can be back and the guest editors are doing it, and then we know at least that this special issue is okay. Okay. Yeah, so thank you very much for your attention. We will meet tomorrow morning at 10.
At 10. At 10. Not Turkish time. Okay.
What is Turkish time?
10:30.
15 minutes later?
15, 20 minutes later. So let's make it 10. We'll have the tea ready for at 9:30. So you could have relax with the tea and like refreshments. And then we can start at 10.
Yes, okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yarın ben yine sizlere arkadaşlar link göndereceğim bunun için dinleyenlere tekrar duyurulur. Size de hoşça kalın. Bağlandınız. Teşekkür ederiz.